I wonder what movie Sonic would look like.
every beginner animator makes. So the first mistake is using same FPS all the time. If you don't know what does FPS means, you must watch this video after this one. I have seen many beginner animators that they just use the same FPS all the time. Whenever you open Flipper Club, by default, it shows you 12 FPS, and many of you just stick to that, and don't even try to use any other of them. Sticking to just 1 FPS all the time can bound you in your creativity. So what should you do? Answer is very simple. Be experimental. Try using different number of FPS for different animations. Like sometimes you can animate on 14 FPS, or sometime you can hop on 20, or maybe 16, or even 10. Try working on all of them and eventually you will understand that which one works best for you. Like, when I started animating I always used to animate on 12 FPS, and all of my animations that I have posted on this channel are made 12 FPS, but one day I thought let's try playing it on some other FPS, so I played it on 16, and when I played it on 16 it ran very fast, then I decreased it to 8, then it was looking somewhat good but a bit slow, so eventually I learned that 12 works best for me. 8, 10, 12, and 16 are the common FPS used by most of the beginners. And there's industry standard FPS which I've told in this video. And from past some time I am also animating on the same FPS. There is one more thing that I love to do, you all might know that, I always prefer to animate using pose to pose method. In this method firstly I draw all the key poses, then the breakdowns, and then further in betweens. So, when I draw all the keyframes, then I don't preview it on the same FPS I'm working on. Well, I lower down the FPS to around 4, and then I play it. This way I can see every keyframe very clearly, and it helps me to understand that how the end product is going to look like. If there is something which needs to be adjusted, then I come to that frame, and make the final changes. Second one is, using dark mode. Flipper Club has newly added the dark mode feature in their app. We all know dark mode is good for our eyes. It helps reduce the strain on eyes. But there is a problem in dark mode of Flipper Club. Whenever you click on the layer option, you can see all the layers, but you can't really see what you have actually drawn in that layer. It doesn't shows you the thumbnail of that layer, which makes it difficult for you to pick the right layer. This way you either have to name all the layers, or you will have to toggle the eye button again and again to see what you have drawn on that layer, which is very time consuming and bothering. It's just my personal opinion, that if you will use the regular light mode, it will be easier for you to draw on different layers. Moreover, it is up to you, both have their pros and cons, you can choose whichever works best for you. The third one is, not using anchor point correctly. Whenever we need to resize or rotate something in Flipper Club, we just make a selection of it, and move it as we like, but this is not the best method to do it. You should always change the anchor point from center, to the point from where you want to rotate or scale it. But keep one thing in mind that, anchor point should be changed only when the selected object is not moving from the center. One more amazing hack of Flipper Club is that, whenever you want to copy and move something in many frames, but from the same point, then you should also copy the anchor point of it. All you have to do is, make a selection of it, move the anchor point wherever you want, then click on this copy button, and now come to the next frame and paste it. Now you will notice that, it has also copied the anchor point of it, which means you can move it from the same point as before, which is really helpful, or else you will have to change the anchor point of it again and again for every single frame. Fourth mistake is, not using animation principles. I have already shared in many of my previous videos, that you should use principles of animation. But many of you don't actually know that, where and how to use them, because there are 12 animation principles, and sometimes it becomes confusing to understand that which one will be applied in your animation. So what should you do? All of these are super helpful, but there are only 3 of them that should be used in almost every animation. These are easing, squash and stretch, and arcs. These are the 3 animation principles which I use in my almost every animation. Here is an animation with none of them, and in this one all of them are used. Now, after applying all 3 of these, you can add some more principles like smears, follow through, secondary actions, and much more. For example, whenever there is a quick or fast moving action, you should always use arcs and smears, and when there is a secondary object attached to the main body, then using follow through is a must, and whenever you want to show things like surprise or excitement, you must use anticipation. I am also thinking to make a video about explaining all these principles in very detail. Do let me know in the comments if I should make it or not.
Stop taking meeting notes and let ClickUp AI Note Taker do it for you. It allows you to focus on your meetings, not your notes. It captures everything.
Today we're looking at 3 ideas that will instantly improve your animation and also save you loads of work. I haven't just chosen these ideas because they're low effort and give a huge reward. I've chosen them because they're 3 of the biggest challenges animators face. These are ways to improve your consistency, believability, and even give you ways to get unstuck when you get really tied up in your own thoughts. I used to think the only way to make better animation was to work harder. But after 15 years in the animation industry, I've come to realize you don't need to do things on hard mode all the time. So all of these ideas are super simple and you can start using them straight away. Idea 1 is about creating consistency in your animation. Making sure your characters or objects stay consistent when you're animating is super important for believability. This might be one of the topics I get asked about the most, and it's really easy to assume you just need years more drawing practice before you'll improve. But there are some really simple steps that you can start doing straight away, which will make things loads easier. The most important thing with consistency is creating consistent volumes. Consistent volumes are where we try to keep the shape or object or character the same size as we move it around. Things will look super weird if they change size every frame as you're moving them. Think about a water balloon. If I push on it, it doesn't get smaller, it stays the same size, it just kind of squishes outwards. That's how most things work. Look, there are exceptions, but in general, we want to keep things a consistent volume, otherwise they lose that believability. There's a quick trick for keeping consistent volumes in 2D animation, and it's an old school trick called off-peg animation. If I draw a ball over here and then the next frame is here, it's really hard for me to tell if they're the same size. But if I transform my onion skin and move it over here, I can check it a lot more easily. Every animation software does this differently, but if yours doesn't have this function, just copy and paste your frame and move it over. Use that as your guide and then delete it afterwards. It's called off-peg animation because traditional animators would take their animation paper off their pegs and move it around to help with this. Professional animators often take this concept one step further by using approved poses or character sheets underneath their animation. You can trace these and use them as a guide to keep consistency across a whole sequence of shots. You can't just trace these perfectly, but they offer a really good starting point. The second really quick way you can improve your volumes is actually by turning off your onion skins entirely. Once you do this, you can flip between your frames. Your brain is going to pick up inconsistencies a lot more quickly with this technique than with onion skinning because of an effect called the persistence of vision. When you see traditional animators flipping their pages like this is what they're doing. My favorite way to practice consistent volumes is a really simple exercise I like to call the magic blob. This is where we animate a gooey blob dancing through the air, and we try to keep the volume consistent over time. I have a whole video on that here if you want to check it out, and you should try. It only takes 10 minutes and it's the perfect way to practice. Another easy thing you can try is to draw simple 3D shapes over the top of your characters. You can use these shapes to create new poses in the future, or you can use them to check animation you've already done. The way I like to do this is to create a new layer on top of my animation, sketch out these simple shapes, and transform them to line up with rough animation I'm working on. It becomes clear really quickly if my characters have grown or shrunk in unrealistic ways. And I know this might seem like extra work and it's going to slow you down, but I can guarantee you that this is so much faster than trying to do everything in your head at the same time. In fact, this is one of the techniques I teach in my big animation course, Animation Basecamp, so I get to see that it really levels up people's work super quickly. One of my students, Robin, came into the course with very little experience, but was able to turn this head turn into this using this exact technique. If you want to join Robin and the other students in Animation Basecamp, I'll throw a link for that down below. So now we have some really quick ways to make our animation feel more consistent. We can keep improving on its believability and how solid it feels with our second big idea I want to talk about today, something I like to call contact points.
Hello everyone, today I am testing an interesting tool called Hitem 3D.
And this is a big one. I don't like to say there are right ways and wrong ways to animate, but I don't think I've ever seen someone get contact points wrong on purpose. Contact points are any places your characters or objects touch each other. They usually only take up a tiny bit of screen space, which is why they often get overlooked. But our brains are incredibly sensitive to these tiny points because they give us lots of information about weight. Here's a really simple example from an exercise I like to teach. The goal of the exercise is to fire an arrow at a target. Here's an example of what it might look like if we're not careful. I've got this big impact with the target and it rocks back and bounces into place. But if we look closely, it looks kind of weird, right? Like kind of floaty. And that's because the feet are moving all over the place in an unnatural way. But if I pay special attention to the contact on the ground and really make sure they're staying in the right place, this is what it looks like. This is the exact same animation, frame for frame. But in one, I've been really careful with the contact points and it feels a lot more believable. If you have a walk cycle and you put it into a scene with your background and the feet start sliding around, it's always going to feel weird. Even if we aren't that conscious of how feet interact with the ground in everyday life, If you get it wrong in animation, your audience will always get a gut reaction that something's not quite right. But if you nail the contact points, your animation will feel much more believable. Look at this shot from Porco Rosso. Just perfect. So yeah, really pay attention to contact points. Pay special attention to any time something's touching the ground or when your characters are touching something else. The simplest way to get super consistent contact points is to create a new layer, mark exactly where you want that contact point to be, and use that as your guide. If you're working on a walk cycle, you can pick part of the foot and mark it on each frame. Then pick a spot on the floor and go through and make sure that these points don't slide around. Because toes and heels lift off the floor at different times, you can do the same process for the front of the foot and the back of the foot for the best accuracy. Spending a few extra minutes making sure your contact points are nice and accurate is one of the best habits you can get into as an animator. It'll save you loads of work later on, and it also makes all of your work feel way more believable and solid. And speaking of good habits, that brings me on to my third idea, the perspective reset. When I imagine animating, it feels like I should be able to draw one frame after the other and just let all my ideas flow out of me. But what I find is that while the day might start like that, as I work longer and longer, I get slower and slower because I'm kind of tangled in all my own ideas and all the frames I've drawn, and I just get stuck. At this point, I either want to give up or I just make loads of extra work for myself that isn't getting me any closer to finishing the shot. What I discovered though is that I can create some sort of creative circuit breakers which will help me get out of this state of mind and help me skip all that frustration and that extra work. These are like the animator's version of flipping a drawing so you can see it fresh. When we animate, it's really natural to make a lot of our actions take a similar amount of time. And that means that the rhythm ends up being quite boring. It kind of plods along like a metronome, like boom, 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 boom. But when you're several hours into animating, this can be really hard to notice. Interesting rhythm is one of the best ways you can improve your animation. So if I ever need to reset my perspective on my rhythm and my timing, all I'll do is I'll play my animation back and make sounds with my mouth as each of the actions happen. We're naturally way better at hearing rhythm than we are at seeing it. Let me show you what I mean. If I sound out this rough animation, it might sound like bum, 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 which is all very even and not very exciting. What I really want is kind of a clattery, dynamic, chaotic rhythm to add some excitement to the whole scene. So now I know that I can delete some frames, I can add a few details, and keep sounding it out as I go. So after a while, the rhythm starts to sound like bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, bum, which is way more dynamic. I can also add some secondary elements to make the rhythm feel even more interesting. Of course, you can't let this technique hurt your other ideas like weight and staging, but I find that almost every first pass of animation can really benefit from me just making some silly sounds over the top of it. The last really reliable way we can reset our perspective takes a little bit of practice, but I actually think it's one of the best skills you can start to build as a creative person. In a perfect world, the best way to reset our perspective would be to ask an experienced animator what they think of our work. But we don't always have access to people like that. On the other hand, most of us can think of a friend or a family member who doesn't know anything about animation, and we can use them to get this fresh perspective. But it's not the same sort of perspective, and I'll show you what I mean. Offer to show your work to your friend. I find that this trick works best if they're in the same room as you. Now, when you press the play button, try to watch your animation rather than your friend's reaction. Suddenly, you'll find that you see your whole animation fresh. There'll be parts that you would have watched hundreds of times that now start to feel a little bit wonky, and there'll be other parts that you were really worried about and were really laboring over, and they feel totally fine now. This is that fresh perspective. Suddenly, you're not thinking like an animator who's been stuck for hours, you're thinking like the audience. This will totally change how you see your animation and give you loads of ideas about what you want to do next. For the second step, you can ask your friend what they thought of your animation and just be completely open to what they have to say. But you're not really looking for criticisms or specific ways to change anything. You just want to get a sense of whether they understood what was happening. Because if they didn't, you probably need to work on some ideas around clarity in your animation. Focus really carefully on the words they use to describe the motion in your scene. Do they use words like floaty or jittery or abrupt? Then think to yourself whether those are words you want to use to describe your motion.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44, a complete AI creation platform. Describe what you want, and watch it take shape. You can plan, custom.
And if they're not, you might need to look at ideas around timing and weight. There is a chance that they offer suggestions on how to change your animation. And I don't want to be rude here, but those suggestions are almost always wrong, but they're still really useful. And maybe this is the bit that takes a little bit of practice. But for example, maybe they'll say something crazy like, oh, I think the character could use a cowboy hat. And you're just like, but that doesn't make any sense. It's still worth thinking about why they might have suggested that in the first place. Are they stuck on something? Maybe you've drawn your character's head a bit weird and your friend just gets the sense that something's not quite right and they don't know how to articulate it. The point I'm trying to make here is don't take their suggestions too literally. Just focus on what might be at the heart of what they're trying to change, and you'll have to use your intuition and your animation fundamentals to figure out what steps to take next. I recommend doing this whole process a couple of times while you're working on your animation because you don't want to leave it too late. So it's good to ask a friend during your rough pass so they can focus on like the big ideas of staging and storytelling and just the timing of everything overall. Because if you don't fix those ideas early, it's really hard to change later on. You can also ask your friend to check out your animation towards the end of the process, and that will give them a chance to comment on the polish and the fine details of the piece overall. This process does take a bit of practice and kind of a thick skin, but if you can learn to get useful feedback from non-experts, it unlocks this huge resource that you can be using in all your creative endeavors for the rest of your life. The new perspective I get from my friends and my family members almost always gives me something really constructive that I can work on next. It's a great way for me to get unstuck when I'm feeling bogged down in my own ideas. All these techniques are things I use basically daily in my animation career, and now you can too. But quick tricks like these are way more effective if you also have a deep knowledge of the animation fundamentals. And my favorite way to improve animation fundamentals is by learning about weight. So if you want to check out weight, I have a whole video on that here. And if you want to take a full animation fundamentals course with me, check out Animation Basecamp in the description below. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll catch you next time. Today we're learning two of the most useful animation ideas there are. They add impact and energy to pretty much anything you want to animate. I'm using the ideas in this animation. I can use them to make this animation.
Learn Spanish with Real Spanish TV.
No veo nada, no veo nada.
Click on words in the subtitle
Sí, mejor.
to get an
into this, which can help motivate big effects animation like this. And I'm probably using them too much in this animation. So I can take them out entirely to make it feel more relaxed, or I can just tone them down a bit to make it feel more subtle. The ideas we're covering today are anticipation and overshoot. Normally these ideas are taught separately, but I think it's way better to learn them at the same time because they're kind of like mirror images of each other. So let's dig into what they are, and at the end of the lesson, I'll show you a technique where we can start using these ideas in our own work straight away. Put simply, anticipation is a movement before your main action, and overshoot is a movement at the end of your main action. So this bit here is anticipation, and this bit here is overshoot. Anticipation does two important things. It builds up energy, and it helps with clarity. This little downward movement here is anticipation. This archer pulling back their bow, that's anticipation too. If we're jumping, we go down and then spring upwards. That downward motion, anticipation. When I imagine anticipation, I imagine a spring. So we squish the spring down to add energy, and then release it all at once, and it bursts upwards. A good rule of thumb for anticipation is that it usually happens in the opposite direction of the main action, and it's almost always smaller than the main action. Of course, there are always exceptions. In this case, I've really exaggerated the anticipation and then had a quite small main action, so I had a little jump. I did this because I thought it looked funnier. And here I've made an anticipation that builds energy in the same direction as the main action. And it still works. But yeah, generally most anticipations are in the opposite direction to the main action. The second reason we use anticipation is to help with clarity in a scene. So it's less about building up energy and more about storytelling. Let's say I want this character to pick up a banana. I could do a really simple movement where he swings his arm up, grabs the banana, and looks at it all in a single motion. But I think we could make it clearer by adding an anticipation pose. In this case, I've brought the hand up and opened the palm before he grabs the object. So he's moving his hand away from the banana before he moves it towards the banana. This creates a nice clear pose indicating what he's about to do. This anticipation isn't building up energy like a jump. It's just creating some more contrast in the poses, which helps with clarity. In this example, I have a simple head turn. Because we're quite close to the character, the head turn is pretty clear. But if we were to show the same movement from further away and fill the scene with lots of characters, the audience might miss this simple move. You can draw the attention of the audience to where we want them to look by adding an anticipation before the main movement. I could even make this anticipation a bit bigger if I wanted to and add a little overshoot. So yeah, anticipation in this case is being used as a tool to make the scene a little clearer. Even though anticipations do happen in the real world, they're far more common in animation. That's because animators are often more focused on clarity and energy than realism. So if you want a cartoony flavor to your motion, exaggerate your anticipations, and if you want a more realistic or understated motion, consider reducing or removing anticipations. Okay, on to our second idea, overshoot. As I mentioned before, overshoot comes at the end of the action. It's where we go too far and bounce back. Overshoot is super useful for slowing things down really quickly while making them feel like they still have weight. Let's do an experiment with this car. Let's start with what people might call the default way to slow things down. We get closer and closer together as it comes to rest. But what if we want the car to stop suddenly? This is how it would look if we just take out all of the easing, so all of that slowing down section. It doesn't feel very natural, does it? It comes to a sudden stop, but doesn't have any weight now. So now if I add this overshoot back in, you can see that it stops suddenly, but has a lot more weight. Just say I have a rubber ball and I want to drop it and stick to the floor. It could do something like this, but it feels a bit weird. But if I let it go too far, then spring back up, it feels a bit better. I can add multiple overshoots to this motion. So when it springs back up, it goes too far a second time before settling into its final pose. The classic example is the springy door stopper. This is essentially lots of overshoots in a row as it tries to settle in its final position. The more overshoots, the bouncier things feel. You can definitely overdo this, so just experiment with finding a nice balance. Overshoots don't just happen with objects, they happen with characters too. In this jump, the character touches the ground, they squash down before bouncing into their final position. That squash pose is the overshoot. Here's an example where I have a chef holding a ladle as they make a gesture. I've decided to give a bit of an overshoot to the gesture, which really helps give some weight to the ladle. A good rule of thumb is that an overshoot is going to be smaller than the main movement, and if you do multiple overshoots, each one is going to be smaller than the last. Animation ideas like these are really fun to learn, but when I was starting out, I had a really hard time trying to figure out how to actually use them in my own work. So, for example, I might start animating something like this, and but I've already drawn all these other frames, so I guess I can kind of squish the anticipation in between them. But when I test the animation now, I realize that some of these in-betweens aren't working because the spacing's gone a bit weird and the arcs aren't quite working with this new pose squished into the middle. So I start redrawing parts of the character, trying to make the arcs work. But because I've got so many drawings already done, it's really hard to start to change this at this point. And when things are this hard to change, I think that we just stop experimenting and having fun with our animation. So what I do now is much more organized. For a movement like this, I might start with 3 poses. The start pose, the end pose, and one pose in between called a breakdown. I might even roughly time them out on the timeline. This gives me a rough idea of how everything is feeling, and at this point I ask myself, could this motion use an anticipation and maybe an overshoot? For this specific motion, I know that I want it to feel powerful and dramatic. And from everything we've learned, I'm pretty sure anticipation and overshoot are going to help quite a bit. So I can draw in an anticipation pose, and I'm going to go really big here because I really want it to feel like he's building up lots of energy. The character's quite cartoony, so I can really push this pose. And just a bit of a side note, if you're enjoying this class, there are loads more videos on this channel that I think you'll love. And if you feel like taking your animation even further, you can check out a new deep dive course I've just released called Animation Basecamp. This is my idea of the ultimate animation fundamentals course. It's got 25 exercises and loads more resources where we cover all the most important ideas for becoming a great animator. There's a link below if you want to check it out. So now I have this anticipation pose, I can step through it, and I think I might actually add an overshoot pose as well. So I'll pop that one in here. So what you might notice about this overshoot pose is it's pretty subtle. So I've mostly moved his clothes up because they kind of like overshoot further than the rest of the body. And I think that gives it that nice little bit of extra impact and weight. Now I can step through these poses and I can kind of get a sense of how this motion is going to work. So I've got these 5 poses. I've got my starting pose, my anticipation pose, a breakdown pose, an overshoot pose, and the final pose. So these are the 5 poses I experiment with to figure out this motion. Because I added such a big anticipation, I found that my breakdown didn't flow as well as I wanted, so I changed that slightly. But this was so much easier because it's one drawing rather than 5 or 6. Once I'm happy with these poses, I can draw all the frames in between and I can feel pretty confident that it's going to work. And now I've got the fundamental ideas in the animation figured out, I can get a bit more indulgent by layering over some effects animation to really exaggerate this impact and power. But that wouldn't work if I just kept the animation the way it was when I started, because I don't think that the energy felt motivated by his action. If you'd like a class on this sort of effects animation, let me know in the comments below. So you might remember the chef at the start of this class. I actually animated him 7 different ways to sort of explore different ways that we could use anticipation and overshoot for that one motion. I did this by experimenting with different kinds of anticipation, different kinds of overshoot, and I was able to do that really quickly using the technique I've just showed you. If you'd like to know more about this process, I actually have a full video here on YouTube called Keyframe Like a Pro, and you can check it out here. Anticipation and overshoot are 2 of the most useful ideas any animator can have. So I hope you enjoyed this class, and if you have, maybe you can check out other videos on this channel. Thanks so much for being here. I'll catch you next time.
One track is fine, but sometimes...
Hi, welcome to Animation for Anyone. My name's Alex. Today's lesson is a bit of a crash course in animation. We'll start with how animation works, and then I'll share with you the 6 ideas that I think are the most important to understand when you first start animating. And after that, I want to show you my thought process for how we can use multiple animation ideas at the same time. Let's jump in. I think the easiest way to understand how animation is working is by looking at a flip book. If you're anything like me, you might have made little animation flip books out of your exercise books at school. You draw a picture and then a slightly different picture, and you keep going until you flip through your pages and see your pictures move. This is how pretty much all animation works. We create still images and play them back quickly to create the illusion of motion. If you've never tried it, maybe spend a few minutes now. It's pretty fun. Flipbooks are a good way to visualize animation, but they're a little bit hard to demonstrate the ideas I want to explore today. So instead, I'm going to use a coin and capture the visuals digitally. That lets me play back the animation at a constant, predictable speed of 24 frames per second. In future videos, I'll show you how to do this, but for now, we're really just looking at the ideas behind the animation and how to plan out the movement. So if I want to animate this coin moving from one side of the piece of paper to the other, I take a picture of it, move it a little, and then take another picture, and then keep going until I get to the other side. Now, when I play the images back, it feels as though the coin is moving across the screen. Looking at it though, I think it feels a bit weird. I think the most important question you can ask yourself while you're animating is how does this motion feel? This is my guiding principle while I animate. All of the fundamentals we talk about today and in future lessons really come back to this one question. So if I ask myself, how does this motion feel? I'd probably describe it as jumpy or jittery. Let's look at why that might be happening. Below the coin, I've illustrated the exact spacing of each of the frames. You can see that it's not very even. There are frames that are really close together and there are frames that are really far apart from each other. And that's because I've not been very deliberate about how far I move the coin each time. So if this motion feels jumpy or jittery now, I think we could make the motion feel a bit smoother by making the spacing between the coins a little bit more even. Now that I've evened up the spacing, you can see that the coin moves a little bit more consistently across the screen. There's no more jumpiness. At the moment, the coin moves across the screen in 1 second, or 24 pictures. Let's see what happens if I move it across the screen in less time. I think we can see two really clear things here. The coin moves much faster, and the spacing between the coin is much larger than before. Let's see what happens if we make the coin take longer to cross the screen. Okay, I think that the results here are pretty clear as well. The coin feels like it's moving more slowly, and the spacing between the coin is much closer than before. So this is the first big idea in animation I wanted to show you. Things feel fast when they're far apart, and slow when they're closer together. So if I ask myself now, how does this motion feel? I'd say smooth or consistent, but maybe a little unnatural. The coin starts moving suddenly and then stops moving suddenly. So if we wanted to make a more natural feeling, the coin could start moving slowly, speed up in the middle, and then slow down at the end. We start slow by having the coins closer together, and then gradually get further and further apart, and then we slow the coin down by making the spacing closer and closer until we come to a stop. I think that's starting to feel a bit more natural. For this next step, I'm going to loop the animation so that the coin travels from the left of the screen to the right and then back again, using the exact same spacing. For this next step, I'm going to exaggerate the speeding up and slowing down a little. You can see that the spacing's changed, so the parts that were close together before are even closer together now, and the parts that were far apart are even further apart. Let's see what happens if we exaggerate it even more. You can see now it feels a bit more lively or zippy. We don't always have to start slow and finish slow either. Here's an example of how changing the acceleration can entirely change the way the motion feels. In this example, I have a coin that slowly speeds up, gets really fast, and then changes direction suddenly. This gives us a kind of bouncy feeling. One thing that I think is quite important to mention at this point is that these motions all feel quite different, but they have the exact same timing. They all take 24 frames to get from one side of the screen to the other. All of the difference in the way that they feel comes from the amount of space we put between the frames. So this is the second big idea I wanted to show you. If we want to make things slow down or speed up, we gradually get closer and closer together or further and further apart from each other. This is called acceleration and deceleration. Some people call it easing, or you can just call it speeding up and slowing down. So far, all of our animation has been done using a coin, which doesn't change shape. I'm going to start using a cutout piece of paper so that we can change the shape as we animate. In this first example, I'm going to take the fastest frame of animation and stretch the frame out a little. This changes the feeling of the animation. I think it feels a little less rigid, maybe more zippy, more lively. Let's try changing the shape again, but this time we'll squash it. I think the best example to demonstrate squash would be our bouncy animation. I'll start by stretching out the frame where we're moving the fastest, and then squash it where we change direction. This is going to make it feel a little bit more like a bouncing ball.
I dare you to let me build you a completely free e-commerce store preloaded with 20 handpicked products that are trending all over the world, basically validated by AI.
Squash and stretch is the third big idea I wanted to share with you. It's great for adding a little bit of life to your animation and making it feel less rigid. It also really helps the audience understand what the object is made of. This coin doesn't squash or stretch as it bounces, so it feels quite hard. whereas a rubber ball might squash and stretch heaps, which is what makes it feel rubbery and stretchy. So that's 3 big ideas covered, and I've got 3 more I want to show you. The first is anticipation. Anticipation is a really important part of animation, but it's something that's easy to forget about when you're first starting out. Anticipation does 2 key things. It builds up energy, and it also gives the audience an indication that something's about to happen, which really helps with clarity. When I think of anticipation, I think of a spring. It builds up energy in one direction and then releases it all at once in the opposite direction. You might like to think of someone jumping. Before they jump up in the air, they often move down to build tension in their body. This downwards motion is the anticipation. In this example, I have a ball that moves quite suddenly and then slows down. To make it feel more natural, I could add a little bit of squash to anticipate the movement. This makes it feel like we're building up energy and releasing it all at once. The 5th idea I'd like to talk about is overshoot. Overshoot is like a mirror image to anticipation. Imagine you have a really big movement, go too far, and then bounce back. Overshoot helps add weight or springiness to your animation. In this example, I've added a double overshoot to the ball as it springs back into place. You might have noticed that all of our motion so far has been along a straight line. The last idea I'd like to talk about today is arcs. Things in nature don't usually follow a perfectly straight line. More often than not, natural movements follow some sort of arc. Arcs tend to add flow to your motion. In this example, I've taken our coin and rather than moving it directly across the page, I've swung it down like a pendulum. This gives it an entirely different feeling. Okay, so those are the 6 big ideas I wanted to talk about today. Let's have a bit of a recap. Our first idea was about speed. If we make things closer together, they move more slowly, and if we make them further apart, they move more quickly. Our second idea is about spacing and acceleration. If we gradually get closer and closer together or further and further apart, things feel like they're slowing down or getting faster. The third idea is about squash and stretch, and how using it can add a bit of life to your motion and also give the audience a sense of what your objects are made of. The fourth idea is about adding anticipation to your motion. This will help build up energy and sometimes add clarity. Our fifth idea is overshoot. This is where we let objects bounce back after a big movement. And our sixth idea is about arcs. This is where we decide if we want our motion to follow a straight line or a more natural flowing arc through space. So the question is, how do we use all of these ideas at the same time? If you're working on an animation, you can ask yourself, how does this motion feel? The answer could be anywhere from, it's great, I love it, to could be better, or it could just be, this feels wrong. If your answer is anything other than great, I love it, you can use these ideas to start asking questions that will help improve your animation. Does the speed feel right? Should we change the spacing to adjust the acceleration? Should we be using some squash or stretch? Or maybe we need some anticipation. Are the arcs working well? Or do we need some overshoot to help sell the weight? I'm going to walk through a simple animation now and use these questions to help push our animation to the great I love it part of the graph here. So for this animation, I'm trying to make a ball jump in the air and land on the other side of the screen. Let's just move the ball upwards, 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 and then come back down again. It takes 1 second or 24 frames to get to that point. And let's play it back at full speed. Now if I ask myself, how does this motion feel? I'd say not that great. It feels unnatural, it feels stiff, it doesn't have any weight to it. So this is where we can start asking those questions and apply those animation ideas that we've been talking about. I'll start with the most obvious thing, to me at least. I think this motion could use an arc. If I imagine a cannonball flying through the air, I don't imagine a straight line up and a straight line down. I picture more of an arc. This is because it's being affected by gravity. So let's add an arc to this motion. Okay, so I think that's starting to feel better straight away. Let's see what other ideas we can start working into this animation. I think we could use some squash to create an anticipation so it feels like the ball is building up energy before the jump. I think that we could exaggerate the acceleration by using a couple of frames of stretch in the fastest part of the motion. And we could also use a bit of squash to create an overshoot when the ball lands. This will give it a bit more weight and make it feel a bit more springy.
Oh, hi! Would you like a free gift? I'm a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay, I think that's looking even better. It's a totally usable piece of animation.
Oh, hi! Would you like a free gift? I'm a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
I think we could use some squash to create an anticipation so it feels like the ball is building up energy before the jump. I think that we could exaggerate the acceleration by using a couple of frames of stretch in the fastest part of the motion. And we could also use a bit of squash to create an overshoot when the ball lands. This will give it a bit more weight and make it feel a bit more springy. Okay, I think that's looking even better. It's a totally usable piece of animation. But if I ask myself one more time, how does this motion feel? I'd say it falls into this area here. So if I look at these ideas again, I can think about which ideas I could exaggerate even more. I think that we could push the anticipation even further, so it feels like it's shaking and building up energy just before it jumps. I think that I could fine-tune the spacing a little bit more so that the acceleration is clearer as it leaves the ground. And I think that I could exaggerate the overshoot even more by adding a stretch frame. This means that it'll have a kind of double overshoot, making it feel really springy. And this is the final result. I think that it's got a lot more energy and personality now. And that's it, 6 of the biggest ideas in animation and how to start applying them to any animation you want to make. Thanks for sticking with me. Now for some homework. Choose an animation medium. It could be anything from a flipbook to a program that you're learning, and take one of the 6 ideas we've talked about here today, like anticipation or arcs, and create a short animation based on that, maybe 1 to 2 seconds long. Then take a different idea, maybe squash or stretch, and create a second animation, once again 1 to 2 seconds long. And lastly, create a short animation that uses both of these ideas at the same time. Hopefully you've enjoyed this crash course. We'll be looking at these individual ideas and many more in future episodes. See you next time.
Goodness gracious!
My work is easy because I use ClickUp. Here's how I keep track of all my tasks. I start by brain dumping everything I need to get done in a list view. Next, I set a priority.
Hi, welcome to Animation for Anyone. My name's Alex. In today's lesson, we're going to help answer the question that every animator asks themselves hundreds of times a day. How much space should I put between these frames? The answer will depend on 2 things: how fast you want your object to move, and whether it's speeding up, slowing down, or staying constant. The first part of this is pretty easy to answer. If you want your object to move quickly, make the spacing further apart, and if you want it to move slowly, make the spacing closer together. The second part of the question, speeding up, slowing down, or staying constant, takes a little bit more thought. It means that we need to look at the spacing of several frames to make sure we're creating the motion that we want. So to really quickly answer that question, if you want to make your animation speed up, look at the last 2 frames and make your next frame further apart than them. If you want to make your animation slow down, make your next frame closer together than those last 2 frames. And if you want to keep your speed constant, make your spacing the exact same as those previous 2 frames. That might be the only information you're looking for right now. But personally, I like to understand why things happen in animation. So for the rest of this class, I'm going to dig into those 3 options and try to understand them better. And just a little warning, I like to think of some of this stuff from a slightly scientific perspective. Don't worry though, this is animation science, not like real science class science. And just to reassure you, here's a little example of just how simple I want to keep it. Imagine I have a coin on a table, and I move my finger towards it. When I touch the coin, it starts moving. We certainly wouldn't expect the coin to start moving before I touch it. So to make it move, I added force. This is the key to the next few minutes. Some forces aren't things we can see easily, things like friction or gravity. But if it helps, you can think of them just like the finger in this example. They push against an object in a particular direction. Okay, let's get back to those 3 options. When we first start animating, it's tempting to make everything move at a constant speed. In fact, many animation programs use a constant speed as their default, and it's easy to understand why we do it. We know how many frames we want the animation to take, so we divide the distance we want to travel equally by the number of frames and animate away. It's good to understand why an object might move at a constant speed, and then decide if it's right for your motion. Let's look at something moving at a constant speed. This cyclist is pedaling to move forward, and the wind and the friction from the road is pushing back against him. Because the cyclist is moving at a constant speed, we can tell that the force from the pedaling and the force from the friction are perfectly balanced. This is an idea we're taking from science. For something to be moving at a constant speed, or even just to be sitting still, all of the forces at play need to be perfectly balanced out. This careful balancing act between all of the forces is one of the reasons we don't see constant movement as often in the real world. And if we do see it, it's usually accompanied by the movement speeding up and then slowing down. So that brings us neatly onto the idea of speeding up and slowing down. Let's look at how they work. This ball was moving and then it stopped. That's because it's got friction acting on it, but no other forces pushing it forward. So the balance is thrown out and we slow down. This car, on the other hand, is stopped and then it starts speeding up. It's able to do this because it's got a whole engine to create force that overcomes the friction. So once again, the forces are thrown out of balance and we speed up. As you probably remember, spacing that gets closer and closer together like this is called deceleration and shows an object slowing down. And spacing that gets further and further apart is called acceleration.
Hello everyone, today I am testing an interesting tool called
And shows an object speeding up. Animators sometimes call acceleration and deceleration easing. So the important takeaway with acceleration and deceleration is they require some sort of force to be happening, and that force needs to be greater than any of the other forces at play. Okay, so that's the sciencey stuff. Let's look at a couple of examples and try to tie those ideas into our animation. We have a large, heavy ball. This ball is still, so it wants to stay still, and it's going to stay still until we apply some force to it. So let's do that. Now, let's break down the spacing a little. Our character applies force to the ball, and it accelerates forward. For a brief moment, the character's force and the friction force are equal, and we move at a constant speed. And then the character gives up and loses contact with the ball, meaning that the only force acting on the ball is friction, so it slows down. At this point, you might be thinking, okay, I get it. We just need to add some speeding up and slowing down at the end of each movement, and we'll be fine. That'll kind of be true a lot of the time, but there are loads of examples where it won't be true, and we need to think about those too. In this example, I want to have a ball that bounces across the screen. If we use the spacing I just talked about, it looks a little something like this. It looks interesting, but I don't think it looks much like a bounce. If I think about the main force affecting the ball, gravity, I can decide the ball will speed up as it moves with gravity, and then slows down as it moves against gravity. That feels much more like a bounce to me. The good thing is now that I've figured out which bits are speeding up and slowing down, I can exaggerate those things as much as I want, and it will still generally work. You can use the same thought process for characters too. There are two main reasons you might want to exaggerate your spacing: to add impact and appeal to your movement, or to help communicate to the audience. Usually by giving us a few extra frames and a little less movement to focus on the most important poses. As a general guide to exaggerating spacing, break the laws of physics as much as you like, but break them in a believable direction. I use forces to help me find that direction. Sometimes you don't want to worry about friction or gravity or forces at all. You just want to make things move around the screen. And that's totally fine. It's animation. We can do whatever we want. Speeding up, slowing down, and staying constant are still the only options you need to choose from though. And it's worth remembering our brains have evolved to interpret movements to mean certain things, so understanding the physics behind the scenes can still really help. As an example, one of the biggest issues that beginners battle against is their animation feeling shaky. This is where the spacing between the frames changes randomly every frame. Thinking about the lessons we've just learned, it would mean that there were different forces acting on the object 24 times every second. This sort of thing is pretty rare in the real world, so often it feels like something's out of place. There's nothing wrong with making shaky animation, but it's useful to understand why your motion feels the way it does. Okay, so I admit this is a pretty long-winded way to answer that original question: how much space should I put between these frames? So let's simplify things a little. While you're animating, have a quick look at the spacing of the previous frames, and then decide if you want to be speeding up, slowing down, or staying constant. If you want to be speeding up, make the spacing further apart than the previous two frames. Slowing down, make it closer, and if you want to stay constant, make it exactly the same. I actually tend to look at 3 or 4 frames before my current frame, which helps keep things a bit smoother. If you're having trouble choosing between the 3 spacing options, it might be worth thinking about the forces at play to help narrow things down. Pay special attention to contact poses, because this is where the forces often change most dramatically. And don't be afraid to exaggerate the spacing if you think it's going to help your animation. Spacing is one of the most important aspects to animation, and because we don't experience it in real life very often, we have to be kind of organized in the way that we think about it. So hopefully this class has given you some ideas about how to approach spacing in the future. Now for a little bit of homework. Create 3 animations between 1 and 3 seconds long. In your first, show something speeding up. In your second, something slowing down. And in your third, something staying constant. I hope you've enjoyed this class. Please don't forget to check out the other videos in this series, and I'll catch you next time.
Love Roblox? Earn Roblox digital gift cards with Microsoft Rewards. Sign up for Microsoft.
It's a pretty straightforward fact that having more frames per second in an animation makes it smoother, and although smoothness in animation isn't everything, a decent amount of it does have appeal. It can be incredibly time-consuming though to animate with high frame rates, especially if you're working with quite a bit of detail. I don't think a lot of people realize that there's more to the smoothness of animation than the number of frames you draw, and you can make an animation still have good flow without needing as many unique drawings. Here's an example of two animations that have the same number of frames played at the same speed. However, A still appears smoother than B. The only difference between them is where each circle is placed. Looking at the spacing, both animations use slow in, slow out, meaning the frames get closer together at the start and end of the motion to create the effect that the movement takes a moment to pick up speed and then slows to a stop at the end of it. However, in A, the smoother appearing animation, the frames at the beginning and end of the motion are so close together that they almost completely overlap. There's a lot of space left in the middle section of the motion. You might think that this animation played would look like a circle just teleporting back and forth, but instead, your brain fills in the gaps and sees it as moving really fast back and forth. I think a lot of people don't realize how effective slow in, slow out is in making an animation look smooth. Instead, there's a tendency to just keep adding more frames evenly spaced throughout, and then maybe adding some slow in, slow out last, usually resulting in movement that just feels plain and robotic. And it's also pretty common to not realize just how much you can, and probably should, push the effect of slow in, slow out as far as it will go, making those first and last drawings really close together. When animating an action that goes from point A to point B, often what I do first is add one frame that goes after the starting one and is almost identical to it. The subject is just starting to move. Then I draw in a frame that goes just before the final one, and draw my lines really close to the final frame. This 4-frame animation looks like this. Might not be convincing enough unless your start and end positions are fairly close together, but if you're trying to work fast and keep your animation quick and simple, you could totally call this done. Otherwise, the next frame to add is most likely going to be one right in the center of the action, when the action is at its top speed. If you think more frames are needed after that, you can add 2 more on either side of that one, each of these a bit closer to the start and end of the action than to the center, to keep up the slow in, slow out effect. How many frames you'll need depends on how fast you want the action to look and what frame rate you're animating with. I've talked a little bit before about how I set my projects to 24 frames per second and then drag out my frames so that some hold longer than others. Looking at my timeline, you'll notice that the frames near the start and end of the action hold and repeat more times than those in the center. I do this to make the easing in and easing out of the action even more dramatic. To put it in other words, not only am I using slow in, slow out with the spacing of my drawings, but also with my frame rate, making the frame rate slower at the start and end of the motion. Here's a couple other animation tutorials if you'd like.
Let's see if I can show you how to make smoother animation in under a minute. There are loads of things that can affect the smoothness of your animation, but the most important idea is spacing. And I think about 2 different kinds of spacing when I think about smoothness: weight spacing and contour spacing. Spacing is the space between your frames. When things slow down, they get closer and closer together, and when they speed up, they get further and further apart. If your spacing is random, it'll feel jittery. Weight spacing is the overall spacing of your object. If you put a little dot in the middle of your object and follow that, does it feel nice? This is the foundation of your animation. If your weight spacing is looking nice, then it's time to look at the contour spacing. This is where we control the outlines of your shape. Turn on your onion skinning, zoom into your contours, and see if they're spaced the way you like. Don't forget your contours are part of a bigger drawing though, so turn off your onion skins to check that your frames are still looking nice as you polish. And you always need to start by adjusting your weight spacing first, and then look at your contour spacing after. If you'd like to learn more about making great animation, check out the resources in my bio. Let's see if I can show you how to make smoother
Do you all read about this or hear this? That you used to go up on Mulholland Drive and park
every night.
and visualize seeing yourself as...
Yeah, I would visualize,
This is when you were broke and poor.
You know, right, having directors interested in me and people that I respected saying, you know, I like your work or whatever that is. And I would visualize things coming to me that I wanted or whatever. Drive home and think, well, I do have these things. They're out there. I just don't have a hold of them yet, but they're out there. I wrote myself a check for $10 million for acting services rendered, and I gave myself 5 years, or 3 years maybe, and I dated it Thanksgiving 1995. Just before Thanksgiving 1995, I found out that I was going to make $10 million.
Choose your fighter. Lightning inspired. Fight.
We've all used public Wi-Fi before, at coffee shops, airports, or hotels. But did you know, without a VPN, you could be at risk of being exposed to hackers?
So animators and magicians have this trick in common, and I'll show you how it works by turning the strawberry into a truck without any drawings in it.